I released my first commercial game in November, so this talk is really just kind of a lessons learned about some of the things I picked up along the way of making a commercial product for the very first time. I want to make the talk because there's a lot of information on the internet, on Reddit, on some blogs, on GDC talks, and they're a little outdated, especially for small teams, very small teams like 1 to 5, making their game on their own. So a little bit about me before we get started. My name is Shadi. I do not work on games full time. I work as a data scientist. I live out in Beaverton, in the suburbs near Beaverton, I should say, technically Portland. I like to train trapeze a few times a week. My wife and I are fans of reality TV aficionados. We've been watching Love is Blind Season 6. It has the most disgusting men I've ever seen. I highly recommend it. I also really like board games and D&D. And these are screenshots of my game, which came out last November. Little bit about what I made, mostly because it's important to contextualize my experience, which will be different than your experience as you make games. I made a multiplayer dating sim, which is very niche. It's a party game with combat elements, also very niche. The core premise of the game being that you have 5 days to grab a date before the end of the world, and that the story is told very dynamically and changes run to run, so you work towards one of like 100 and something different endings. That's kind of the premise and pitch I went with, and that's how I position myself in the market. Here are my stats. I feel it's important to show your receipts. I don't like showing my receipts. I feel like I'm in my underwear a little bit. But in the first 4 months, Doomsday picked up about 85,000 net revenue on Steam, which is pretty decent, but not like some gigantic viral hit. This is enough, I think, for like one guy working in an office, not enough if you're a larger team. Keep that in mind. You'd have to make a different kind of game, something a little less niche. But this is kind of my experience. I also did not launch with 40,000 wish lists. I launched with 16,000. That number definitely goes up post-launch. So we're going to talk about none of the stuff in gray. It turns out you cannot give a 70-slide presentation in 20 minutes. We're going to talk only about the stuff in black. If you have questions about any of the stuff in gray, and it really hurt me to cut all that out, feel free to ask. Many of these things are related, but we're going to talk mostly about the marketing stage, because I think that's the part that's very new for lots of developers trying to launch commercially. I also think that's the place where a lot of the feedback is a little warped, mostly because marketing, when you have a following and have fans, is very different than when you have 0. So, the first thing we'll talk about is algorithmic disruption. Essentially, when you are working on an algorithm team, you want to detect virality. So you might want to know, hey, is this game going viral? Is this song going viral? Let's detect it, let's boost it, take advantage of it. And Steam does the exact same thing. So if it detects your game is going viral, because there's a large injection of, say, wish lists pre-launch, they start giving you free visibility. They ramp it up, and you see that in your wish list counts. They go from 1 per day to maybe 5 per day to maybe 15 per day, 60 a day, 100 a day, etc. So typically speaking, you're going to want to focus all of your marketing efforts into individual points, trying to create such a large wave that Steam thinks you're going viral, and then in exchange starts boosting you up the search rankings, etc. So I'm going to talk a little bit about like disrupting the algorithm. This is a concept I mean. This is also why games that have existing fan bases have such an easier time. They don't really have to go through the start. They kind of open up with a really big announcement day, disrupt the algorithm on day 1, and their resting wish list rate is pretty much never 1 or 2 like it is for a lot of solo developers. So let's talk about announcements, because I just mentioned existing teams doing their announcements, and something I hear a lot online is to make your Steam page as fast as possible. And I'm going to tell you not to do that. Make it when you have polished art. If you have programmer art, you're going to hurt yourself, and the reason that is the case is because Steam gives you a visibility boost the second you publish your page publicly. So if you have programmer art, you're going to make a worse first impression. You're not going to get that disruption you're looking for. You're going to put yourself behind a little bit. That might mean you start marketing 3 months before launch, 6 months before launch, because I know art takes a really long time to trickle in. Wait for it. It will be worth it. You'll have a much more impactful launch that way. The other piece of advice I see all the time is that you should spend $5,000 to $10,000 getting your trailer professionally edited by someone who does video game trailers. And I'm going to tell you not to do that. And there's a couple reasons for it. First, you're very new. Presumably, if this is your first commercial endeavor, you're going to make mistakes. And it's a very expensive asset to have as your very first opening move. But the other thing to keep in mind is that marketing as an existing studio and as a new indie is very different. And as a new indie, the channels you're going to use to grow your fan base aren't the same today as they were years ago. Today, you might rely on short-form video content. That means TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, vertical video that doesn't and shouldn't be as polished because it doesn't do as well, as opposed to like putting your video on IGN or Reddit or something, where you're not likely to get onto IGN and your Reddit post may get taken down by mods. Do create a trailer. I'm not saying don't do that, but maybe keep your budget to like a few $100s. Except that maybe it's not going to land, it might get taken down, but limit the amount of risk you're putting in really early because you don't want to come into this with like a $10,000 liability. And let's talk about social media because this is probably the most important thing I'm going to talk about today. When I started, I had 2 Twitter followers, and they were both sound designers on my game. There are 2 types of social media. There's connected and there's unconnected. One moment, I'm choking on my own hubris. So a connected platform is going to be something like Twitter, games like Facebook, you opt into it. And I see a lot of indie game developers in their first games try to grow a following on Twitter, on Mastodon, on Reddit, on Facebook. It is super hard to do this. Reddit has some unconnected elements, but the problem with using these kinds of platforms is that people have to opt into you, and they don't know you exist to do that. So people who succeed typically know somebody or have a friend of a friend who's very big, very famous, who can boost them. This isn't most people. You probably want to leverage unconnected social media, which is social media where algorithms recommend what pops up on your feed. TikTok, YouTube, Instagram Reels, lots of the new Zoomer vertical video. You're going to have to learn short-form video. That really sucks to find out as a guy working on a narrative game, by the way. But it works for me, so it will work for you. Promise, probably. But you will have to spend some time on unconnected video, and that will be how you can grow your fan base from nothing initially. I recommend being on multiple platforms at once. I had a video on TikTok, for example, do 6,000 views, and on Instagram do 180,000 views. It's not necessarily related to the quality of the content, so much as the way they step the content up through its stages. We're not going to talk about that right now because it's going to add like another 8 minutes to this presentation. But the short of it is that there is a little bit of a distance between quality and performance, and it's okay to just try things in multiple places. And the fan bases are slightly different too. I think Instagram has more millennials, my people, who get me. I'm not hipping you on for TikToker anymore. Impact. There's a couple reasons we want to do this. If you have a semi-viral video, something gets like 20,000 views, you'll get a big wish list injection for somebody who's super new, and that's really helpful. Like 100 wish lists at once is a lot when you only get 1 per day. The other reason, and we found this after about 3 months, once we kind of figured out what people like on TikTok, our resting wishlist rate went from 1 per day to 15 per day, which is a lot when you're doing your marketing over a period of months. So I do recommend being there, and that's kind of how you get traction early. I do have a note on influencers because they come up every single time we talk about marketing. And decide like, oh, send it to YouTubers, they'll make your game big, they'll make your game viral. And they definitely help, and you should definitely reach out to them. However, paid promo doesn't work. You cannot click the link because it's in a slide deck, but I asked around a bunch of other much more successful indie devs than myself, and CTR on paid promo is really, really bad. Conversion is low and cost is high. If you want to spend money, spend it on Facebook ads or TikTok ads or something. It's very corporate, and that kind of sucks to hear. But when people see hashtag ad on a sponsored stream, they tune out basically every nice thing that person is going to say for the next 90 minutes. The other thing to keep in mind is that influencers don't necessarily make or break launch. My launch was a disaster. We had some press planned, didn't happen. Sent some stuff to influencers, it came in over weeks instead of a single day. Rough time. But we launched at the same time as another kind of spicy game. Not the same, but it's called Thirsty Suitors. That game is published by Annapurna Interactive. If you don't know who they are, they published Stray and Neon White, so very big games. And they did not drop the ball as hard as I did. They have a game that has more followers, that had more wish lists, that has a higher review score. They had a console release. They launched with 4,000 streams. I launched with like 40 on release day. But Doomsday has more active players, has more owners, higher sales figures, basically every revenue-related metric across the board. I'm not going to throw shade at them. I'm sure they're a fantastic developer. But my point is more that getting your game in front of more eyeballs doesn't necessarily translate to more sales or more revenue if it's not organically connecting. And you really want that organic engagement. Also, Steam is going to be responsible for your long tail, and not YouTube and not Twitch. And so you want to convince Steam that you're like a real game to pay attention to. So one of the ways to do that is via Steam events. This is another really great way to get wishlists injected into your game. Unfortunately, the process of applying to Steam events looks a whole lot like seeing rejection emails in your inbox, flooding you 50 at a time, as if you were applying for your first job out of college. And I am here to tell you that that is normal and it is okay, and to do it anyway. The first reason is that you can just get a lot of impressions and wish lists in a single event. This is a screenshot from several screenshots of the impact of Roguelike Celebration. Thank you. Doomsday got 3,100 wish lists from the event. Some other developers I talked to got 1,500, 2,000, 3,000. Our impression counts went from 5,000 to 100,000 overnight. But what was really impactful wasn't just the 3,000 surge, which is a lot for the record, but what happened afterwards. After the event had expired, our resting wishlist rate stabilized at around 60 per day, and then continued to climb up to 100 per day for about a week or two until we hit like new and trending or whatever. And that's that algorithmic disruption I'm talking about. This won't happen on all Steam events. It won't happen on most Steam events. It will happen typically if you can get into a more exclusive events, and to get into those, it helps to have a lot of wish lists and following ahead of time, which is kind of where you go back into like, make your TikTok videos and eat your vegetables. Okay, I managed, did we do that in like 10 minutes and not 30? This is a good day to be me. Woo! Now, I'm gonna give up the floor for questions, and it is my sincere hope that I don't see a single hand, okay? I'm gonna count to like 5. Already, like.
I'm sorry. So you folks must be on Steam. Have you looked at any other game storefronts like itch.io? I know they're like a lot smaller, but.
I signed, so the question. Yeah, the question was, I focus mainly on Steam, have I looked into something like itch.io? And the reason I didn't look, or didn't talk about EGS and itch.io is because I signed an Asian publishing agreement, and that requires that I have reporting on country by country sales, which I don't think I have via itch, to the best of my knowledge. If somebody knows that, and I am wrong, let me know. So I wasn't able to explore them too much. I think you should, if you can, put it as many places as possible. At least in terms of itch, EGS also has a $100 fee. So if you're not expecting to make, like tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's a little bit harder of a recommendation to make because you're gonna have to spend some amount of effort trying to build up wish lists there too. And that might just be a lot to do for a very small team, for like 1 to 5.
Did you ever consider like releasing a free demo of your game?
The question was, did I consider releasing a free demo of my game? I did. And I released it during Steam Next Fest, which is an event, if you are going commercial, you should absolutely put a demo in for. Few reasons for a demo. The big one is it lets you do an influencer round pre-launch. It's like a really good excuse to do so. We didn't have time to talk about it today, but influencers are fantastic when you're watching them stream your game because they talk about exactly what they're thinking to their chat. And you get like an unsolicited, just raw train of thought, feedback on every single feature. And it's nice to see what they don't really respond to at all. Like, we cut features because nobody found them fun. Like, they didn't find them unfun, they just didn't say anything. And I was like, okay, this feature has to go. So that's the big reason I'd recommend doing it. It does add a lot of work to create a demo. You ideally want a demo that has like some call to action and wish list at the end of it. If you're making a narrative game, you probably have to like segment your story in like neat chapters. So plan for that in advance. If you're making a roguelike, it's a little bit easier, I think, to make that structural adjustment. And just make sure it's like a smooth experience. Like, don't give too much away so that people are completely 100% like, oh, I've had enough. But I haven't seen many people do that, so I think if you can get away with the demo, definitely do it.
So with making promotional material for your game for social media and stuff like that, what is kind of the most efficient way for you? Because I know creating that kind of content can take a bit of amount of time just out of just creating it, and also kind of what is the most efficient for you, and kind of what is the pacing kind of for how often you post promotional.
So the question was, for me, what was the most efficient way to create and paste content for social media? Which is a really good question because it takes a really long time. It's a lot of effort, honestly. It's why people have jobs. I did partner for a time with somebody who just did TikTok stuff for my page. It helped a little bit, to be honest, but before launch, I was doing all of it by myself. What I found is the more frequent, the better. This really sucks to hear. We were at 3 times a week for a while, and that was pretty good in terms of the amount of content. For the month before launch, I went up to 5 times a week, and I really hate to say that it helped because there was a lot of additional content. I don't recommend somebody goes that high unless you have a bigger team. Like, if you're a team of 5 versus 1, maybe 5 can go ahead and split that. One person, you're going to be looking at, an entire afternoon every week doing that, and that's a little bit much. In terms of deciding what content, we actually figured that out via experimentation and also via survey data inside of our game. We had a little feedback form on the end of our demo that people could fill out, and we found out, oh, people like the characters. So if I were to go back to our TikTok slide, you're going to see that all of the thumbnails are people, like in-game characters. It's because that's what people really resonated and responded to in the survey, and that's what the viewership ended up being when we experimented.
Thank you.
I'm curious what you think about publishing in development progress type stuff as a sort of promotional tool.
The question is, what do I think about publishing dev blogs, essentially, right? Like in-progress dev snapshots as a promotional tool. I think those are mostly interesting to other game developers. I like them as a networking tool. If you want to get on Mastodon or something, I post it on Mastodon because it's where the devs are. But if you want to get on Mastodon or something and share your blog, I think there are other developers who can see that, and it's helpful to have a network of developers who can boost your content and give you advice and help QA your stuff too sometimes, scratch each other's backs. Regular gamers, I don't see them tracking that stuff a whole lot, and it takes a long time to write. If you want to travel if you want to get real deep, if you want to make a YouTube account, become a content creator, build a following of 100,000 and then promote a game, I've seen that a couple times. But at that point, you're content creator first and developer second, and that's kind of that. There's a certain point essentially where to appeal to the masses, you really have to be churning out multiple things a week, and to hit the kind of quality and have a big fan base, you're going to have to put in a lot of work. I see no more hands. I think we did it.